Today I'm going to be taking a look at a watch, and I guess just a brand that probably most people don't know. It's called Dekla. They are out of Germany, and I think kind of a unique factor about the kind of brand itself is that most of the watch is built in-house. The dial, the case, the hands, and it's pretty well done. So let's take a closer look. We have a diameter of 40 millimeters, lug to lug of 47.2, height of 11.8, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for the watch, we're going to have the ETA 2824 beating in here. It's currently running at about plus 6 seconds a day. It is supposedly regulated in-house by Dekla to around plus or minus 7 seconds a day, so mine is running within that. We also have 200 meters of stated water resistance with a screw-down crown, which is fairly nice to see for a fairly thin watch overall. Very gently domed, like gently domed sapphire crystal with an inner AR coating, and everything you see that is white on the dial, except the Dekla signage, is coated in BGW9 Lume, and actually the seconds hand is not lumed as well. Last but not least, the watch retails for around 465 euros for the black dial version, and going to dollars, that's around 550, and then I think shipping's another give or take 50, so basically $600 in for the base model of this watch, an extra $50 for these kind of fume degradé dials, so anywhere between 550 to 650 for this pilot's watch, which I think, based on how they say everything from the case to the dial to the hands is made in-house, is pretty good if you ask me. So moving on to the dial, and I think Dekla has a really cool modern take on a pilot watch. As we can see here, we have the 3, 6, and 9 in these very bold and angular numerals. We have a nice, very legible triangle at the 12 o'clock marker, and then we have these double batons for every other hour marker. And I think it just gives it a really nice modern look. It's not quite as vintagey as kind of a just classic Explorer layout. It's not quite as, I guess, super industrial as a complete Flieger's layout. This is a kind of nice in-between, and I think a very good look for the watch. Very minimal text and everything kept really simple. As we can see here, we have the outer seconds track with these large nice pips. Everything on the dial does have a nice kind of 3D dimensionality to it. You can tell it is printed with kind of multiple layers. And as a result, there's actual depth to all the applied elements on the dial, which I think is a really nice touch. Looking at the hands, we have this kind of nice classic sword style handset with the kind of middle blacked out to kind of give that kind of floating appearance. I think it looks cool. I think the dial itself is done really well. Everything here is executed really nicely and it all plays well together. They kept the text very minimal on the dial with just the Dekla logo, or Dekla spelled out, and Turbulenz, which is the model, and automatic right below that, also in the German spelling, which is kind of nice to see. And then at the very bottom here, we have handmade in Germany, but written in German. Really clean dial. I think the kind of very gentle fume of the green is a really nice touch. It isn't a really aggressive fume like, let's say, the Glashütte Panamatic that I used to have, or let's say even the Anordain. This is a really subdued, almost khaki-ish green color, and you only get the fume to come out in kind of certain lights. And overall, I think that's a pretty cool way of doing it. It's not overly aggressive, but when you see it, it does look pretty cool. Taking a closer look at the dial here, and we can see everything is done pretty well. It has this kind of graining texture that gets darker towards the outside, giving that kind of fume effect. We can see the Dekla logo written out there with a little bit of a misprint on the K, a little bit of a misprint beneath the 12 o'clock logo there, a little bit of roughness on the hands, and this tiny little fiber near that minute mark. But other than that, the dial is really well done. There really aren't that many misprints or imperfections at all. And I still think it looks really good. And I think at this magnification, you can really tell there is a lot of depth to all those loomed elements there. They have a really nice puffiness to them. You can tell so many layers were used. Even that triangle there has a real nice depth to it. I think you have to remember, at this price point, you're getting something that's actually handmade almost from start to finish. And that's something to not sneeze at. It is still amazingly well done despite the very few imperfections here and there. And I mean, that's just down to a little bit of human error. And you know, your model might not have these small imperfections, and that's great. And at the end of the day, I can't really see any of these from kind of wrist view, so I can live with it. I think it still looks amazing, and it is executed really well overall. Everything's really crisp, everything's well done, and I dig it. Moving on to the case of this watch, and I think it is pretty simple. For this model in particular, I had it requested to be an all brushed case rather than the normal bead blasted, just because I think brushed gives it more life. But as you can see, all brushed everywhere, horizontal brushing on the case sides, vertical brushing on the lug tops, a circular brush around the bezel here. Everything really simply done. There's not any kind of crazy shape to the case at all. I think what is nice is there is a fairly constrained kind of lug to lug, and there is a really nice curve down to the mid case, kind of almost meeting the case back. So despite its kind of size and kind of beefy stature with how kind of thick the lugs are, it still does wear well, looks nice, and I think it's relatively wearable for this kind of pilot style. Again, these cases are made in-house by Dekla, and I think it does have a somewhat larger grain of brush to it than that classic machine-made brushing you see at this price point. I think it looks great, it is well done, and really no complaints here. Nice little airplane logo there, and the knurling on the crown is really good. I will say it unscrews very nicely, pops out really nicely. The crown action is all pretty good, so really no complaints there. Talking about the general case construction for a second, I want to say that the mid case overall I think is fairly thin for a 200 meter diver or a 200 meter dive capable watch, and we can see we have this kind of protruding case back and protruding bezel that helps thin out the mid case even more. So for a 12 millimeter watch, it still does have a lot of wearability, and I appreciate that a little bit more went into the design and the ergonomics of the case than I guess had to be paid to it. Really quickly on the case back, we can see a nice deep engraving here, some just general information, Turbulenz, and just some other stuff on the back. Really quickly, this is the stock strap that comes with the watch. It is a really high quality leather, probably one of the best OEM straps I've gotten. I just am not a big fan of the look of the black and the green dial, or really this kind of goldish off-white stitching either, but it is a really nice, well-made strap, really well done, signed buckle, and yeah, really no complaints about the strap. A little thicker, but I think it matches the thickness of the watch. So moving on to how the watch wears, earlier I was wearing my Creedor, and there we have the Dekla on my 6.5 inch wrist. I'm gonna change it to another strap in a second because although it's a very nice and comfortable and well-made and it doesn't take really any time at all to break in, as you can see, it is definitely not made for a shorter wrist, and I have a lot of room left. So I mean, I could punch a hole in it, but you know, I'm fine with using another strap. So here we have it on this nice brown strap. I think it brings out the green tones really nicely. I forget which company this is from, but I'll try to put a link down below. But yeah, let's get it on wrist. So here we have the Dekla on my 6.5 inch wrist, and I think you can tell the lug to lug is very, very constrained. Overall, the watch does not sit too high up on the wrist at all. It is a very comfortable case, albeit a little beefy just because the lug design and kind of how aggressive and bold the dial design is as well. But again, it does wear well. It wears nicely on my smaller wrist. It can wear on a slightly smaller wrist. It definitely will have a lot of presence on a larger wrist. So it is a really good size and case design overall. Looking at it from the side, we do see it conforms really nicely and sits well on the wrist. No kind of comfortable pinching or kind of jagged edges that push into the skin. So really comfortable case to wear. So starting off with some other straps, here we have the Benchmark silicone NATO. I think this nice gray tone goes really well with the green, and of course because the NATO itself is so thin, doesn't really add much height to it at all, so cool combo. Again, because the kind of lugs are so beefy towards the case end and thin out a little bit, it does have a almost bulbous stance at some angles. Like right here, it looks like a very prominent circle that kind of teardrops down and out. So it may not be a case for everybody and it may not be to your liking, but I think it is cool. It is very much different than the classic oyster or traditional just circle with lugs. So it is definitely a different wearing experience. Here we have this nice green NATO, pajama strap NATO from Benchmark straps, or not Benchmark straps, but Blue Shark straps, there we go. This pairs awesomely because it has this nice white strap down the middle that kind of ties into the triangle and these kind of Lume pips. So it just works really well with the watch. There we have it on wrist, really good look. One thing I will note is I think just because the dial diameter is so large and against these lugs are really thick and then they thin out, I think some straps, especially these thinner ones, can end up looking too small on the watch. I think a thicker strap definitely helps add to the just overall look and feel of the watch, and sometimes the strap can feel too thin and too small. Maybe this watch even maybe needed a 22 millimeter lug width, or maybe the case needed to come down to 39 or 38 to make the 20 millimeter lug width work. But I've just noticed sometimes the straps can look a little bit small on the watch itself. And lastly, here we have the White Barton Elite silicone strap. I would of course use my Archer, but I think because the watch is so thin and it doesn't have this kind of bulk and texture to it, I don't think it pairs as well with this sporty watch as I would like it to. And there we have it on wrist. White tones work perfectly with the dial, looks great, pretty summery, but again, I do think this suffers a little bit from looking somewhat thin on the kind of bulkier case, which I don't know, maybe they'll improve upon that, maybe they just like the way that looks. Sometimes I'm just not the biggest fan of it. Another reason it can look off is because there might be a taper to the strap. I think a 20 to 20 millimeter strap would probably look best on this beefier watch. Looking at the lume here, I think you can tell it is a torch. Dekla did a really good job. As I said earlier, all the lume has a real nice puffiness to it and a real nice depth, and that's because they used a lot of lume. It shines brightly, it's uber legible. I do wish there was some lume on the seconds hand there, which is just unfortunate that there's not, but I mean, it's not like it takes away from the legibility at all, and because it glows so well, you can still see the seconds hand, so it's a give or take. Reluming and comparing to the Timex, as you can see, the color temperatures are pretty similar, the brightnesses are actually pretty similar, and if not, the Dekla seems brighter sometimes. So again, I think Dekla did an amazing job with the lume here, and it's definitely not a corner that they cut. Pros and cons of this Dekla. And I think one of the biggest pros is kind of the in-house nature of this watch. Again, this brand, and I don't even think there's many people working there, so at least this guy is making kind of the dial, the hands, the lume printing, and it's done to a pretty nice standard. I think the quality of the construction is definitely there, especially considering the price point. So you're getting a lot of value, and I think a lot of attention to detail that you wouldn't be getting otherwise. Going on from that point, the quality of the dial and the printing is fantastic. The unique color of the dial, that kind of subtle fume effect is done really nicely. The actual 3D depth of the printed numerals and markers is fantastic. The kind of puffiness and the pure whiteness of them, it's awesome. It's probably some of the best lume I've seen personally. And again, this watch comes in at around $600 US, give or take. That's saying a lot. And speaking of the price, it's pretty fairly priced, I would say. Again, this is a fairly in-house watch with, of course, an off-the-shelf movement, but it's adjusted in-house, and the quality of all the construction parts are there. This is coming at around $600, and for that, I think it's very, very reasonable for what the brand is offering. So moving on to the cons, one of the biggest cons for me is the case does feel a little bit bulky. It's maybe a little bit too thick, and it's a little bit weirdly proportioned. It feels very thick, or just very big along the kind of general, I guess you kind of call it mid-case, but the general case itself. And then the lugs feel almost undersized for the rest of the watch. So there is some slight thing they need to do with the ratio, quote unquote, of the case to the lugs, or the thickness of the lugs, or something like that. To me, it just doesn't look right, and on wrist, it doesn't feel necessarily perfect. Very often for me, the straps end up feeling undersized as I'm wearing the watch. Another con is I didn't really like the strap it came with. It's decent quality, I just don't think it fits the watch. It's a little too thick, and I guess that does offset the bulkiness of the case, and I mean, that's one way to do it, but I don't think it pairs perfectly well, and I think it would have been better off with some other style of strap. I don't really have many cons for this watch, which is good. Again, I do think there were some slight QC issues, slightly in the brushing, tiny little things on the dial, but even so, this is a sub-$1,000 watch. Sometimes there's going to be those slight things, and again, if I didn't zoom in at that magnification, I wouldn't have really noticed that stuff. And with the rest of the package that you're getting, it's pretty fantastic. So final thoughts. I really like the watch. It was cool, it surprised me, it's quirky, it's different. The dial is like nothing I've ever seen before. It's cool because it's almost like a Rolex Explorer derivative, or a homage in a way. It drew inspiration from, if you will. And it definitely made it its own. It made it almost more sporty, more militaristic. That's not even a word, but it just made it more modern, I guess you could say. And it was a really unique and fresh take on it. I've kind of almost always been looking for a nice Explorer type dial, and this is one of the first ones I've seen where they've really made it their own. It's nice to see a watch or a brand at this price point paying so much attention to all the little fine parts. Again, because you're getting all these handmade processes, in theory it should be to a higher standard, which is nice to see for a sub $1,000 watch for most of their pieces. Again, it's offering unique dials I haven't seen before, some cool colors. Green is now popular in the watch industry, but even still there aren't too many green dials out there. And overall, especially if you're looking at only the Pilot's watch offerings, it breathes a little bit of new life into it. I mean, they only have a 40 and a 42 millimeter version. It would be nice to see maybe a 38 or even a 36 would be really cool. But as of right now, there is still a lot to like about the watch. Dekla, I think, is a brand you should definitely look into. They do have some fun stuff. They do have some cool designs, and I've come very close to pulling the trigger on multiple of their pieces. And the only reason I've considered buying those other pieces is because I've seen this one in person. I understand it's pretty well made and the quality is there. If you're looking for something different, something a little bit off the beaten path, maybe everyone has a Sinn and you don't really want one, Dekla can be your option. Maybe everybody has a Nomos and you don't really want one, you don't like the long lugs. They have some dressier Bauhaus options for you, or some deck watch options, I believe they call it, which is kind of like a chronometer looking style. So this brand does offer a lot of value, I think. It offers a unique outlet for us watch nerds, and I just think it's fun. Let me know what you thought about the watch. Thank you for watching as always. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you in another one.